So, when we talk about self care, I think sometimes people's eyes roll because they think that self care is either something that costs too much money, so they can't achieve it that way. It takes up too much time, and they just don't have the time for that level of self care and consideration. But I also think that sometimes people have fallen into this trap of thinking that it's self indulgent. We throw words around like narcissism, for example, which is a much more complex conversation that I would leave for another video. But certainly, when we talk about self care, we're talking about nourishment. We're talking about ways that we can rest and recharge the body. And I will say, particularly if you work in industries where you are in high pressured environments, or if you work in particular sectors where, for example, you are repeatedly exposed to difficulty, traumatic incidents, stress. I'm thinking of emergency departments, I'm thinking of police officers, fire officers, paramedics, people that are repeatedly exposed to high intensity, high pressured environments, but without getting the opportunity to reset. You may be particularly vulnerable to something we call compassion fatigue, and that is very much where a person is being repeatedly exposed to stressful situations without the opportunity to reset and recharge. Now, the good news is that compassion fatigue is completely treatable, and one of the ways that we might treat compassion fatigue is through these restorative acts of self-care. So whether we think of it in terms of something that's self-indulgent, in this perspective, self-care is actually a form of treatment. It's an intervention that can help people manage not just their mental health, but also maintain a level of resilience. The other thing, when we talk about not having enough time, actually, we can achieve self-care in very small, very simple ways. And it's the same as why it doesn't always have to cost a lot of money either. I think when we think of self-care, we often think of spa days, manicures, pedicures, those luxury items that we might treat ourselves to once a year if we can afford it. But actually, self-care is in what I would describe as the daily restorative acts of self-care. Very simple, very straightforward, nothing complicated. Could be as simple as changing your towels or your bedding. It could be opening a window and letting fresh air in and the light in. It could be going for a chat with a friend. Self-care doesn't have to be achieved in isolation. It can be something that you do with loved ones or friends and family. It could be reading a favourite book or a magazine. It could be stopping for 5 minutes and having a lovely cup of tea. So this is one of the reasons I wanted to emphasize this point about self-care and why it's very much in the little things. It doesn't have to be, although it can be, it doesn't have to be those big things that you might think of, like a yearly treat that you might have, like a spa day or an annual holiday. It might actually be something that you could achieve very easily without costing you any money at all, or very little money, and certainly not taking up too much of your time, but ultimately will be essential in terms of managing and maintaining good mental health.